Everyone in the city knew Daniel Mercer, the billionaire who built his empire from scratch. His company, Mercer Holdings, owned everything from skyscrapers to hospitals, and his name was synonymous with control. But behind the immaculate suits and the sharp gaze was a man haunted by silence. His wife had died years ago, leaving him with a son he barely understood. The boy, Ethan, was 11, quiet, withdrawn, and often lost in a world Daniel didn't have time to enter. But what Daniel didn't know was that the greatest lesson of his life wasn't waiting in a boardroom. It was waiting in the very home he thought he controlled. Because sometimes fate doesn't send us storms, it sends us people. This isn't just a story about pride and power. It's about humility, awakening, and poetic justice. So sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn, because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. And if you're just joining us, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up, because this story is only just beginning. It was a cold Tuesday morning when Grace Miller started her new job as a maid at the Mercer estate. She was in her early 30s, soft-spoken, with hair always tied neatly beneath a simple scarf. Her uniform was freshly pressed, though worn from years of use. Grace had worked her whole life, cleaning, cooking, and surviving, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who still believed in goodness. She needed the job desperately. Her son was ill, and every paycheck mattered. The Mercer mansion was a world she had never known. Polished marble floors, walls lined with art worth more than her entire life's earnings, and a silence that echoed louder than noise. She was assigned to the East Wing, Daniel's private domain. He didn't talk much, didn't smile, and never said thank you. Every instruction came through his assistant. Marjorie, a woman who wore professionalism like armor, Grace worked quietly, unnoticed, invisible, until the morning everything changed. Daniel had an important investor meeting scheduled at home. Every detail had to be perfect. The table was set, the lighting adjusted, and the staff briefed. But when he walked into the dining hall, his son Ethan sat at the table, giggling as Grace helped him fold napkins into the shape of birds. "What's going on here?" Daniel's voice was sharp, cutting through the laughter. Grace straightened instantly, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, sir. He asked if I could show him." "I didn't hire you to play games with my son," Daniel snapped. "Go back to your duties." Ethan's smile faded. Grace lowered her head and quietly stepped back. The silence that followed was suffocating. But as Daniel turned to his guests, something unexpected happened. Ethan whispered, "She was teaching me origami." "You never teach me anything fun." Daniel froze. His guests shifted awkwardly. Pride forced him to continue the meeting as if nothing had happened, but deep inside, his son's words lingered like a bruise. That night, Grace was called to the study. Daniel stood by the fireplace, the glow of the flames reflecting off his polished shoes. "You're here to work, not to bond with my son. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. "You cross that line again and you're done." Grace nodded, but her eyes held no anger, only quiet resolve. "Understood, sir." Days passed. She stayed out of sight, doing her work diligently. Yet somehow Ethan always found her, in the kitchen, the garden, or near the old piano. He would ask questions, small ones at first, about her life, her son, and what made people kind. Grace always answered gently, teaching him small lessons in humility, patience, and empathy without realizing it. And slowly, Ethan began to change. He smiled more. He spoke to his teachers. Even Marjorie noticed, but Daniel didn't. He only saw distraction, his carefully built structure slipping. One morning, Grace accidentally entered Daniel's study to dust before a meeting. His laptop was open, showing a presentation she didn't understand. She noticed a framed photo on his desk, his late wife holding a baby. She gently wiped the frame, her eyes soft with compassion. When Daniel walked in, he misread the moment entirely. "What are you doing here?" His tone was cold. "I was just cleaning, sir, with my personal things." He stepped closer. "Do you think this is your home?" Grace stepped back. "No, sir. I would never." "Pack your things," he interrupted. "You're fired." The words landed like thunder. She stood frozen for a moment, then lowered her gaze. "Understood, sir." Ethan ran in moments later, panic in his voice. "Dad, no! She didn't do anything!" Daniel didn't answer. His face was stone. Grace simply knelt, hugged Ethan, and whispered, "Be good. Keep learning." And then she left, quietly, without tears, the same way she had lived. That night, for the first time in years, the Mercer mansion felt colder than ever. Ethan refused to eat. Daniel poured himself a drink, but couldn't finish it. He told himself he had done the right thing, that boundaries mattered, but the silence that followed him felt like judgment. 2 weeks passed. Ethan grew quieter. Tutors came and went, none lasting more than a day. The boy wouldn't listen, wouldn't speak, wouldn't smile. Until one morning, as Daniel drove through the city on his way to a meeting, his car stopped at a red light near a small community center. Through the window, he saw her, Grace. She stood before a group of children holding a chalkboard, teaching them with the same kindness she once showed his son. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. "You never teach me anything fun." Daniel froze, his throat tightening. She wasn't just cleaning floors. She was shaping hearts, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Mercer, the man who built an empire, felt small. The following week was brutal for Grace. Losing her job at the Mercer mansion meant losing her main source of income and the medication for her sick son. Every night she would count the coins in her purse, whispering a prayer over a photo of her boy. Yet she never complained. Every morning she dressed neatly, tied her hair in that familiar bun, and walked to the community center, where she volunteered to teach underprivileged children for free. They called her Miss Grace, and to them she was a hero. To herself, she was just surviving. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer was losing control of the one thing he valued most: his image. His board noticed his absence of focus. Investors whispered that he'd gone soft, and even his assistant Marjorie dared to ask, "Sir, is everything all right at home?" He brushed it off. "Fine," he said coldly. But it wasn't, because Ethan had changed. He refused to attend his elite school. He ignored tutors. When Daniel tried to lecture him, the boy said quietly, "You fired her, the only one who listened to me." Those words pierced deeper than any market loss ever had. One rainy evening, as Daniel worked late, he heard laughter again, this time through the open window of his car as he stopped at a traffic light. Looking up, he saw the same woman he'd dismissed weeks ago, Grace, teaching a group of children under a worn canopy. Some had no shoes. Some wore clothes too small for them, yet their faces glowed with joy. Grace's voice carried through the rain, warm and patient. She wasn't defeated. She was alive. Daniel lowered his window slightly, just enough to hear her say, "You don't need to be rich to be kind. You just need to believe you can make a difference." He froze. Those words weren't meant for him, but they hit like a confession. The car behind him honked, snapping him back to reality. He drove off quickly, yet the image stayed in his mind. The chalk-streaked woman he'd dismissed now, teaching the lesson his wealth never could. That night, guilt sat heavier than the rain outside his window. He poured himself a drink, but couldn't touch it. The mansion, grand as ever, felt hollow. Ethan's laughter had disappeared completely. For the first time, Daniel felt like a stranger in his own home. The next morning, he decided to fix what he thought was the problem: control. He increased Ethan's study hours, replaced tutors, and even removed his son's sketchbooks. "I'm doing this for your future," he said sternly. Ethan stared at him and whispered, "No, you're doing it for yours." That night, Daniel found a note on the kitchen counter. It was written in shaky handwriting. "I'm going to find Miss Grace." His heart stopped. He called the driver, the police, the school, everyone. Hours passed. No one knew where Ethan had gone. Then at 10:15 p.m., a call came through. A volunteer from the community center said, "Your son's here. He's safe. He's with Grace." Daniel rushed there, rain pouring hard, headlights slicing through the mist. When he arrived, he saw through the glass windows Ethan sitting with the children, listening intently as Grace taught them how to read. She was soaked from the rain, yet she smiled as if nothing in the world could break her spirit. He pushed the door open, water dripping from his coat. Everyone turned. Grace froze, eyes widening, but she didn't speak. Ethan stood up. "I came to learn from her," he said quietly. Daniel looked at his son, then at Grace. "You could have called me," he muttered, his voice trembling between pride and shame. Grace stepped forward, holding Ethan's shoulder. "He didn't run away, Mr. Mercer. He came to find meaning. Something we all need." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You think you understand what he needs better than I do?" Her voice was calm. "Maybe not, sir. But sometimes children need to be heard before they can learn." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel simply turned away and left. But as he stepped outside, her words echoed in his head again and again. Children need to be heard before they can learn. That night, alone in his car, he gripped the steering wheel tightly. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt lost. Days turned into weeks. Grace's small class began to grow. Donations trickled in from local families. She still lived simply, still cared for her son, still smiled through struggle. Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled into guilt. Every time he passed that community center, he slowed down but never stopped. His pride wouldn't let him. He kept telling himself that he had been right, that professionalism mattered more than sentiment. But deep down, he knew he had been wrong, and then fate decided to intervene. One rainy afternoon, Ethan came home trembling with fever. The doctor said it was pneumonia, a complication that could have been prevented if he hadn't spent time in the cold. Daniel sat by his bedside all night, helpless. The boy whispered weakly, "Dad, she wouldn't have let me get sick. She takes care of everyone." Those words shattered what little pride he had left. The next morning, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. Not for wealth, not for success, but for forgiveness. And somewhere across town, Grace woke to find a familiar black car parked outside the community center. The driver stepped out and handed her a letter sealed with the Mercer family crest. Inside were just 5 words, written in Daniel's bold hand. "Please, he needs you back." The morning sky was heavy with rain when Grace Miller arrived at the Mercer mansion again. The driver opened the car door and gestured politely. "Mr. Mercer is expecting you, ma'am." She hesitated at the entrance, her heart racing. The last time she had stood here, she'd been dismissed like she meant nothing. Now everything felt different. The silence, the air, even the sound of her own footsteps. Inside, Daniel Mercer waited near the grand staircase. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. His tie was loose, his expression tired, his pride chipped away. For once, he didn't look like the man who owned everything. He looked like a father, afraid of losing the only thing he truly had left. "Grace," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, unsure what to say. The distance between them felt vast. He took a deep breath. "It's about Ethan. He's not well. The doctors say he's recovering slowly, but he refuses to eat, to speak, to—" His voice cracked slightly. "To smile." Grace's eyes softened. "Where is he?" "In his room," Daniel replied, stepping aside. "He's been asking for you." When Grace entered Ethan's room, her heart broke. The boy lay pale under the covers, eyes half open, a sketchbook resting on his chest. The walls were covered in drawings, paper cranes, chalkboards, little classrooms. Every one of them was a memory of her. She sat beside him gently. "Hey, young man," she whispered, brushing his hair from his forehead. "You're supposed to be out there teaching me things, remember?" Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in days, a faint smile appeared. "Miss Grace," he murmured. "You came back. I never really left," she said softly. "You kept me here." She touched his heart gently. Daniel stood by the door, watching the two of them. Something shifted inside him, a realization that all his money, all his authority, meant nothing compared to this woman's ability to heal through kindness alone. Later that evening, as Ethan finally fell asleep, Daniel invited Grace to his study. The same room where he had fired her now felt entirely different. The fireplace flickered gently, reflecting in his tired eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said. Grace shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "I do," he insisted. "I fired you for showing kindness. I let pride decide for me." He paused, looking at his hands. "And I nearly lost my son because of it." She looked at him, her voice calm. "You didn't lose him, Mr. Mercer. You just forgot how to listen." He smiled faintly, the first honest one she'd ever seen on him. "You sound like someone my wife would have liked." Grace's expression softened. "She must have been wonderful," Daniel nodded slowly. "She was. Before she passed, she wrote me a letter. I never read it." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folded envelope, edges yellowed with time. He stared at it for a moment, then handed it to her. "I think maybe I should now." Grace hesitated. "That's something you should do alone." He shook his head. "No, maybe I need someone to remind me what her words really mean." He broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means you've forgotten how to smile. Daniel, promise me one thing. Teach our son not how to make money, but how to be kind. Find someone who can remind him what love looks like. And if that person also reminds you, let her." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the soft crackle of firewood. Grace's eyes glistened. She knew. Daniel looked up. "Knew what?" "That the heart forgets without kindness," Grace said. "And maybe that's what Ethan was waiting for all along, for you to remember." Days passed. Ethan began to recover. Grace visited daily, sometimes teaching him to draw, other times simply reading stories beside his bed. Daniel often watched quietly from the doorway, saying little but feeling everything. One afternoon, Ethan asked her, "Miss Grace, can you teach Dad too?" She laughed softly. "What should I teach him?" Ethan grinned. "How to be nice." Daniel couldn't help but smile at that. For the first time in years, laughter returned to the Mercer mansion, not from success, but from healing. But just when peace seemed possible, the world outside began to whisper. News of Grace's return to the Mercer home spread through Daniel's social circle. The tabloids began running stories. Billionaire hires Maid again. Mystery woman influencing the Mercer family, investors called. Friends made jokes. His board grew restless. Marjorie approached him one morning, her tone cautious. "Sir, people are talking. They're questioning your judgment." "Bringing her back might," Daniel interrupted firmly. "Marjorie, she saved my son's life. With respect." "Sir," Marjorie said, "you're risking your reputation." Daniel turned toward her, his voice calm but final. "Then my reputation can wait." Grace overheard the conversation from the hallway. For the first time, she realized how much Daniel was risking for her. The man who once fired her out of pride was now standing against the world for something far greater: gratitude. That evening, as the sun set beyond the city skyline, Daniel joined Grace in the garden. Ethan played nearby, drawing with chalk on the stone path. Daniel took a deep breath. "I spent my whole life chasing success. Turns out the one thing I never learned was how to deserve it." Grace looked at him gently. "You're learning now," he nodded. "And thanks to you." For a moment, neither spoke. The air was soft, the city lights flickered in the distance, and the quiet between them felt like peace. But fate wasn't finished yet. Because the lesson wasn't about forgiveness alone, it was about transformation. And what would come next would test everything Daniel had finally begun to understand. The following days brought whispers across the city. Daniel Mercer, the man once feared for his arrogance, was now the subject of gossip. The news outlets ran headlines like "Billionaire's strange new mentor" and "Mercer's Maid returns, but why?" But inside the Mercer mansion, something extraordinary was unfolding. For the first time, Daniel didn't hide behind his wealth or reputation. He faced the whispers, the judgment, and the disbelief, and chose silence. Not weakness, just peace. Grace continued visiting daily. Ethan's laughter filled the halls again. The boy was healing fast, and the mansion, once filled with cold echoes, now carried warmth. One afternoon, Daniel invited Grace to join him in his office. On the desk sat an open laptop displaying a corporate press release. The headline read, "Mercer Foundation announces free learning program for underprivileged children." Grace's eyes widened. You're doing this? He nodded. No child should have to beg for an education. You showed me that, she smiled faintly. It's a good start. Daniel laughed softly. You sound like my wife. Grace looked at him, her tone gentle but firm. She'd be proud. But remember, charity without humility is just another business move. Her words struck him, not as criticism, but as truth. Then help me make it more than that, he said. She paused, then extended her hand. Only if you promise to listen. He took her hand. I'm learning. The official launch of the Mercer Foundation became a public event. Cameras flashed. Journalists lined the entrance. Daniel stood on the stage in front of a banner that read, Education for All. Grace stood quietly beside him, dressed simply in a pale blue dress. When the microphones turned toward him, he hesitated for a long moment. Then he spoke, not with rehearsed confidence, but raw honesty. I built an empire thinking success meant power. I was wrong. Success means purpose. And sometimes it takes losing everything, respect, pride, even peace, to realize what truly matters. Reporters scribbled frantically. Daniel's voice grew steadier. I once fired someone who did nothing wrong. She taught me what no degree ever could, that kindness is the foundation of every lesson worth learning. He gestured toward Grace. This foundation exists because of her. The room fell silent. Cameras flashed again, but this time not with mockery, only awe. Grace's eyes glistened. She never wanted recognition, yet here she stood, proof that dignity doesn't require power, just courage. Later that evening, as the event ended, Daniel found her standing alone on the balcony, the city lights glowing below. Grace, he said quietly, you could have walked away from all this. Why didn't you? She turned toward him, the soft wind moving her hair. Because sometimes people aren't bad, they're just lost. You weren't cruel, Mr. Mercer. You were lonely. He exhaled slowly. And you? I was tired of being unseen, she replied. Maybe helping you see again helped me too, he smiled faintly. Then maybe we saved each other. They stood there for a moment, no longer boss and maid, but two souls rebuilt from the same storm. Weeks passed. The foundation grew faster than anyone expected. Schools were funded, children received books, and the press, once critical, now praised Daniel Mercer as a changed man. But one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from a young teacher who'd once been in Grace's class at the community center. Because of you, Miss Grace, I became a teacher too. You taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can rewrite someone's life. Grace smiled through tears as she handed it to Daniel. See, she said softly. This is what change looks like, he nodded. You're right. For the first time, Daniel didn't see success in numbers or headlines. He saw it in people, in lives touched, hearts mended, and lessons learned. That evening, as they walked through the garden, Ethan ran ahead, chasing the fireflies. His laughter echoed like music. Daniel stopped beside Grace. I used to think money could fix anything, he said quietly. But you proved me wrong. Sometimes it just takes one person who cares enough to stay. Grace looked at him, eyes full of quiet pride. You've come a long way, Daniel, he smiled. Because of you. The years that followed transformed not only Daniel Mercer's life, but the lives of everyone his choices had once touched. The Mercer Foundation grew quietly, without the flash of wealth or the noise of publicity. It became a place where children, who once begged on the streets, now came to learn, eat, and dream. Its walls carried laughter instead of echoes, chalk dust instead of polished silence. Grace remained there, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as the heart of the foundation. She oversaw classes, helped train new teachers, and guided Ethan in ways even Daniel couldn't. Every time a child smiled, Daniel saw the lesson he had spent half his life refusing to learn. Money builds walls, kindness opens doors. Ethan, now a young teenager, began teaching small workshops of his own. He often said, Miss Grace taught me everything Dad never could. Daniel would smile proudly whenever he heard that, not with jealousy but with gratitude. One evening, as the golden sun dipped below the skyline, Daniel walked through the garden that once felt empty. The flowers were in full bloom, laughter drifted from the classrooms, and for the first time in years, peace lived where power used to. He found Grace sitting on a stone bench, reviewing lesson notes. The light caught her face softly. "Grace," he said, his voice calm and low, "it's strange, isn't it? All this time I thought I was building an empire, but it turns out you were building something far greater." She looked up, smiling gently. "No, Daniel, you were. You just needed to remember what love looked like." He sat beside her, thoughtful. "Do you ever regret coming back?" "Never," she said, "because all of this, isn't about where I worked. It's about what we learned." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And what's that?" "That dignity doesn't come from power," she replied. "It comes from purpose." Later that night, Daniel walked through the empty halls of the mansion. He paused at the family portrait that had once hung coldly above the staircase. It now included a new image, Grace and Ethan, surrounded by children from the foundation, all smiling in sunlight. He whispered to himself, "You were right, Emily," his late wife's name falling softly from his lips. "You told me to find someone who could teach our son what love is. I think she taught me too." Outside, the wind moved gently through the garden, and the faint sound of children's laughter rose like a hymn. Months later, the foundation hosted its first graduation ceremony. Daniel stood at the podium, older now, his once imposing presence softened by years of humility. Grace sat in the front row beside Ethan, both smiling as proud parents might. Daniel spoke slowly, his words deliberate, full of warmth. "A long time ago, I fired someone who didn't deserve it. I thought I was protecting my world. Instead, I was destroying it, but that person didn't hate me. She forgave me, and because she did, I learned the greatest lesson of all, that forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you free." The crowd applauded, many in tears. Grace's eyes shimmered as Daniel looked at her with a small, knowing smile. That night, after the ceremony, Daniel found himself walking through the city. He passed by the same corner where Grace had once taught children under the rain. The chalkboard was still there, now framed in glass with an inscription that read, "Where kindness began." He stood before it for a long time, his reflection merging with the faint letters behind the glass, and in that moment Daniel Mercer realized that his greatest legacy wasn't his wealth, his buildings, or even his name. It was the simple truth that a heart can be rebuilt only when it learns to kneel.